Have you ever noticed how certain ideas about men and women aren't just debated, they're shut down immediately? Question the narrative and you're told the differences don't really exist. That men and women are essentially the same, despite what biology, history, and daily life seem to show us. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't avoid those tensions. He leaned into them, and he didn't dilute his conclusions to make them more acceptable. He believed women were guided more by instinct than by abstract reasoning. In his view, their influence didn't come from physical strength or philosophical rigor, but from something subtler: beauty, emotional awareness, and the ability to shape outcomes indirectly. Love, he argued, isn't some sacred, eternal bond. It's nature's strategy, a biological impulse dressed up as romance, designed to serve survival, not our personal happiness. And that was only the starting point. His ideas are still among the most controversial in philosophy, not simply because they sound harsh, but because they challenge comfortable assumptions. He questioned whether happiness is even real in the way we imagine it. Not a lasting state, not a final destination, just brief relief between desires. Think about that. If much of what we believe about love, relationships, and gender is shaped by illusion, or at least by biology more than we'd like to admit, what does that mean for how men and women relate to each other today? And if Schopenhauer was even partly right, what happens when we pretend those differences don't matter? There's more beneath the surface here than most people are willing to confront. Few parts of his philosophy spark as much backlash as his writings on women. They were sharp, unapologetic, and by modern standards, undeniably offensive. But they weren't careless outbursts. He believed he was describing biological and psychological realities as he saw them. To Schopenhauer, women were shaped first and foremost by nature's demands, not by detached rationality. Whether one agrees with him or not, dismissing his argument outright is far easier than wrestling with it. He believed that women's decisions were shaped more by emotion, instinct, and immediate desire than by detached logic or abstract thought. In contrast, he saw men as oriented toward ambition, drawn to philosophy, achievement, and intellectual conquest. Where men reached for distant goals and grand ideas, he argued women were more concerned with security, social standing, and the tangible realities of the present moment. These views didn't appear out of nowhere. Schopenhauer lived in a period when women were largely shut out of universities, politics, and professional life. That environment only strengthened his belief that they lacked both the inclination and capacity for sustained intellectual depth. His personal life likely played a role as well. His notoriously strained relationship with his mother and a series of disappointing romantic experiences almost certainly colored his outlook. Still, he insisted his argument wasn't about social convention. It wasn't, in his mind, about who was allowed into which institutions. It was about nature. That's why his ideas remain provocative even now. We live in an age that emphasizes equality, often framing differences as cultural constructs rather than biological realities. To suggest that men and women might differ not just socially but instinctively and cognitively is to step into dangerous territory. But Schopenhauer had no interest in softening his stance to make it more acceptable. He believed he was describing what is, not what should be. Whether you agree with him or strongly reject his conclusions, his perspective pushes a difficult question to the surface. Are we shaped entirely by society? Or are there deeper biological forces at work that we prefer not to acknowledge? In his view, the divide between men and women was fundamental, not a product of education or tradition, but of nature itself. He argued that men are driven by ambition, achievement, and the pursuit of lasting legacy. Women, he claimed, are guided more by instinct, survival, and immediate concerns. These differences, he believed, weren't random. They were rooted in biological necessity. Men, as he saw it, were built for creation, competition, and the desire to leave something behind that outlives them. In his view, a man's urge to invent, build, and conquer comes from a deep need to leave something behind, to carve his name into the world in some lasting way. Whether through philosophy, war, art, or innovation, men reach beyond the present moment. They want to matter, they want to transcend. But that kind of ambition isn't peaceful. It breeds restlessness, dissatisfaction, a constant sense that whatever you've achieved isn't enough. The same fire that drives greatness can also make it nearly impossible to enjoy simple contentment. Controversial or not, Schopenhauer's argument pushes us toward an uncomfortable crossroads. Are these differences between men and women just stories society tells itself? Or do they reflect something deeper, something rooted in biology and instinct? And if they do, what does that mean for how we live, love, and build relationships today? In contrast, he believed women tend to prioritize security over conquest and stability over ambition. Where men try to reshape the world, women, in his view, focus on navigating it successfully. He saw them as more closely aligned with nature, practical in their desires, drawn toward protection, comfort, and certainty rather than risk or ideological struggle. Because of this, he argued, women may often appear more content. They don't carry the same existential pressure to prove themselves through legacy or achievement. Their concerns are immediate, tangible, grounded. This divide in values, he believed, echoes through everything: relationships, family structures, even political systems. Men pursue power and accomplishment, sometimes sacrificing personal happiness along the way. Women, attuned to survival, influence outcomes more subtly, shaping events not through direct force, but through emotional intelligence and social strategy. For Schopenhauer, this wasn't about superiority or inferiority. It wasn't even about fairness. It was about function, different drives, different purposes, each rooted in what he saw as the logic of nature itself. Men, in his view, are wired to look ahead, to chase long-term goals, build something lasting, and leave a mark that outlives them. They measure life in terms of legacy. Women, he argued, are more grounded in the present. Their focus leans toward immediate needs, security, and what can be relied on now rather than what might materialize years down the line. To Schopenhauer, this wasn't a criticism. It was simply nature expressing itself in different ways. He believed that women, oriented toward stability and survival, tend to value comfort, social balance, and practical outcomes. They're less inclined, he thought, to gamble everything on a distant dream or an uncertain payoff. Men, on the other hand, often sacrifice comfort, health, and even close relationships in pursuit of ambition. That same relentless drive can be destructive, but it's also what fuels invention, exploration, and the turning of history's pages. According to him, this difference in how men and women relate to time, future versus present, shapes almost everything. It influences choices, priorities, and especially relationships. It affects what each sex looks for, values, and ultimately rewards. Schopenhauer believed women are naturally drawn to men who can offer tangible stability now, rather than men consumed by uncertain visions of future greatness. Whether one agrees or not, it's a perspective that forces you to reconsider how deeply our instincts might shape the way we connect, commit, and build a life together. In his view, men are driven by the urge to change the world, while women are driven to preserve and stabilize it. Whether you agree or not, that distinction sits at the center of how he understood human relationships. Schopenhauer argued that men chase power openly, through conquest, intellect, status, and visible dominance. Women, he believed, move differently. They don't usually seek control through force. Their influence, he said, is quieter and more strategic, built on persuasion, charm, emotional awareness, and timing. And in many cases, those tools can be far more effective than brute strength. Where men try to shape the world through ambition and innovation, Schopenhauer claimed women shape the world by shaping men. They don't fight on open battlefields. They influence through suggestion, subtle pressure, and carefully crafted perception. He saw beauty as one of the strongest instruments in that dynamic, fleeting, yes, but powerful. Not powerful on its own, but when combined with emotional intuition. The ability to read a room, anticipate reactions, sense weaknesses, and guide outcomes without appearing to do so. This kind of influence is often invisible, yet it can determine the course of relationships, families, and even political decisions. He believed this pattern extended beyond romance and into history itself. Men may have ruled from thrones, but women, in many cases, influenced from behind them, guiding rulers, shaping choices, and redirecting events through quiet persuasion rather than public command. Schopenhauer didn't describe this as weakness. He saw it as a different form of dominance. Men build empires, he argued, but women shape the men who build them. Power isn't always about who wears the crown. Sometimes it's about who has the ear of the one who does. At the core of all this, he believed, was a deeper divide: how men and women relate to time. Men, he argued, are future-obsessed. They live for what could be. In social dynamics, he thought women focus more on securing favorable conditions in the present rather than fighting abstract ideological wars. Even in personal desires, he saw them as less consumed by existential anxiety or grand philosophical quests, and more drawn toward what provides immediate stability or satisfaction. That raises uncomfortable questions. Is it foolish to trade today's certainty for tomorrow's possibility? Is ambition noble or just another form of endless dissatisfaction? Schopenhauer didn't hand down neat conclusions. He simply observed that men often sacrifice the present for the future, while women master the present as it is. And when it came to love, he stripped away any romantic illusion. To him, love was not some transcendent spiritual bond. It was biology wearing poetry as a disguise, a powerful instinct engineered by nature to ensure reproduction, not necessarily happiness. He believed that what we call love isn't some mystical bond or cosmic destiny. It's instinct, precise, calculated, and biological. In his view, love exists for one reason: the survival of the species. Attraction, he argued, has far less to do with compatibility or personal fulfillment than we like to think. It's driven by signals most of us barely register consciously. Men are drawn to youth and beauty not because of poetry or romance, but because those traits suggest fertility. Women are drawn to strength, status, and security not purely out of devotion, but because those qualities historically meant protection and stability. What feels like deep emotional connection, he believed, is often biology running a program beneath the surface. Schopenhauer went further. He argued that a kind of deception is built into love itself. Not necessarily deliberate lies, but instinctive strategies. Men may exaggerate commitment to gain intimacy. Women may amplify affection to secure stability. These behaviors aren't always conscious or malicious, but they follow a pattern. Nature ensures both sides play their part. And here's the tragic part: in his eyes, once love fulfills its biological purpose, once attraction leads to reproduction or security, the intensity fades. What once felt eternal starts to dissolve. The grand romance shrinks under the light of reality. Love, he insisted, is not selfless, not pure, not everlasting. It's one of nature's most persuasive illusions. Poets can dress it up however they like, but beneath the language and longing, he saw biology at work. He extended this thinking beyond romance and into society itself. Schopenhauer considered women essential to social order, especially within family life. But he believed their influence should remain limited rather than expanded. Because he saw women as more guided by emotion, instinct, and immediate concerns, He argued that placing them at the center of law, politics, or philosophy would shift society towards sentiment over structure. In his view, a stable civilization required discipline, hierarchy, and long-term vision, qualities he associated more strongly with male governance. He saw women's priorities, security, comfort, relationships as vital within the private sphere, yet less suited, in his opinion, to the demands of large-scale leadership. Unchecked, he feared society would tilt toward short-term emotional appeal rather than rational order. But history complicates that claim. The modern world has transformed gender roles. Women now lead governments, corporations, universities, and cultural movements. And yet the debate hasn't disappeared, it's intensified. Have these shifts strengthened society, softened it, balanced it, destabilized it? Are the growing emotional and moral appeals in politics signs of progress or symptoms of decline? Has redistributing power created greater justice or new tensions? Even after centuries of change, certain dynamics remain recognizable. Influence doesn't always require a throne. Cultural trends, social norms, and collective attitudes are often shaped indirectly. Women today have more autonomy than ever, yet the fundamental human drives Schopenhauer described, security, connection, stability, are still visible forces in social life. His conclusions may feel outdated. Many would strongly reject them, but the questions he raised refuse to disappear. Has society evolved in harmony with human nature or in defiance of it? And if there are deep-rooted differences between men and women, what happens when we pretend they don't exist? You don't have to agree with Schopenhauer to wrestle with that. But once the question is asked, it's hard to ignore. Schopenhauer's views on women are still among the most controversial in philosophy, not because they're easy to dismiss, but because they press on questions people would rather avoid. Modern culture tends to frame gender differences as products of conditioning. Change the environment, change the outcome. He disagreed. He believed those differences run deeper, rooted in biology, not just social structure. And if that's true, then no amount of cultural redesign can completely erase them. That's where the tension lies. The debate between nature and nurture hasn't gone anywhere. Are women naturally more oriented toward security and relationships, or have they simply been shaped to value those things? Are men inherently driven toward ambition and competition, or have they been trained to see life as a battlefield? Social norms clearly matter, but Schopenhauer believed instinct sits beneath ideology, and instinct doesn't bend easily. According to him, pretending differences don't exist doesn't eliminate them. It just creates friction. When men and women are told they should think the same, want the same things, and move through the world in identical ways, the gap between expectation and reality widens. Frustration builds. Relationships strain. Social systems wobble under the pressure of ideals that don't always align with lived experience. People start to feel disconnected, not from society but from themselves. He would argue that the push for sameness doesn't produce harmony, produces misunderstanding. And that may be the most uncomfortable point of all. Men and women might never fully understand each other. They may be shaped by different instincts, motivated by different priorities, and drawn to different expressions of power. That doesn't mean cooperation is impossible. It doesn't mean conflict is inevitable. But it does suggest that expecting perfect symmetry is unrealistic. Instead of forcing uniformity, perhaps the wiser path is acknowledging difference, without turning it into hostility or hierarchy. Acceptance doesn't require agreement, but it does require honesty, and sometimes honesty is unsettling.